really important to listen to what people say, but it's even more important to listen to what they think. Half the decisions you take which go wrong are because you did the wrong thing, and half of them are because you chose to do the right thing, but you got the implementation wrong. Risk appetite is about the risk that we are prepared to take on. Risk tolerance is our ability to withstand that risk if that materialises.
Welcome to Grit in the Boardroom. I'm Erika Eliasson-Norris. Today's guest is Patrick Dunne OBE, a leading voice in board effectiveness, governance practice, and he's also the chair of Board Delta. Welcome to Grit in the Boardroom, Patrick.
Great to be here.
So you've worked closely with chairs and CEOs and executives for decades. What do you think separates the productive relationship of CEO and chair and an unproductive relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a mathematician by background and I'm dyslexic, so I tend to see a lot of things in terms of mathematical images. And my image of this is a Venn diagram. Yep. So I think where it works really well, you have a healthy level of intersection. So you've got clarity of role on each side. So for the board, that's ensuring we've got the right strategy, the right resources, the right governance. For the executive, that we've got, good. They're delivering, developing the business plan and strategy, and they're maintaining financial and operational integrity. Where it doesn't work is where those sort of two plates, two circles move apart, and you have a sort of parallel universe type situation, or they come too close.
Yep.
And the board and the chair is trying to do the CEO's job. And so I think it's talking about it. It's good level of respect and trust. That's where it seems to work well, and where I'm chair, that's one of the things you really got to focus on. That's a key relationship.
Yeah, and do you think if you're new to the role and there's a new chair coming in, or if you're an existing chair and you have a new CEO, it can be quite difficult, right, at the beginning of a relationship to be able to work out what works and what doesn't work? Any ideas on kind of where to start with that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the latest chair role I have is the Royal Voluntary Service, which I took on in December 23. And I remember in between being sort of appointed and starting, I had a great chat with the CEO, and the first chat was all about getting to know each other, but also how we're going to work together. And then the agenda for the first meeting where I was chair, I chose to basically focus that agenda on how are we going to work together as a board and how are we going to work with the executive, because there was a bit of a reset moment. And I think if you think about it, if you talk about it, if you reflect, if you give feedback, then it all works. I mean, I have the two situations where I'm chair, I have a weekly catch up with the CEO. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's a bit longer. There's no agenda. We just sort of talk about what stuff that's going on, things we need to think about. Sometimes it's thinking about the board meeting after the next one, that kind of thing. I've got one of those this afternoon. So I think it's just a constant kind of thoughtfulness.
Yeah. And are those the right sort of forums to bring up challenge and kind of questions about how things work? I presume if you have that opportunity to catch up, open discussion? Yeah,
they can be. I mean, I like a sort of little and often approach to feedback rather than saving it all up for one day in a year's time. So we will also reflect either the evening or the morning after a board meeting. And, one of the things we do in the boards around chairs, we have a sort of 15-minute reflection at the end of each meeting. We talk about how did we do? Did we rush that? Did we take too much time on that? Are we sure how do we left the management feeling? Those kind of things. And I get the CEO to do the same with the team and anyone else who's come in from outside to present. And then the following day, we'll usually have a chat about, we put the two bits together. Say, well, what have we learned? And then I might be giving individual feedback to a board member, or they might be giving individual feedback to me, where we might say, well, I think you went in a bit hard there. It was a fantastic point, but a little bit hard. Don't normally want the CFO crying, kind of thing.
Wow.
So you'll have that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think if you encourage people to give feedback on you, you automatically get the right to give feedback. And I find if you treat people with respect, you're straightforward. There's no kind of side or game playing. It kind of works.
Yeah. That sounds like a really good way of reflecting on the meeting. Most organisations that I've been in get through the agenda and then instantly people are packing their bags as soon as they go, right, AOB, no AOB, great, let's just get on out. Yeah. But to have that opportunity to reflect must really help, particularly in the moment.
I think so. I think, it's powerful in the moment and it's powerful afterwards. So we might have that reflection, that evening, the next day about the board meeting, and then in our next weekly catch-up, we'll probably maybe have some additional thoughts about things. Or, you might say, yes, we want to do that. But, there might be quite a lot of feedback about the way that we're going to implement and do that. So sometimes it's not just about, taking the decisions. It's also, scrutinising the implementation and making sure we're comfortable with all of that side of things too, without getting into the weeds.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balance.
Yeah,
it's about being human, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. And you talk about kind of a gritty situation. You talk about CFOs crying. I mean, that's not a great place to be.
That didn't happen where I'm chair, but I have experienced that in a former life.
Yeah, because it is how you give that feedback and how you challenge.
Yeah.
I think something that I've found in boardrooms is where there's a poor culture, you can end up with people pitting themselves against others. So I've seen the CEO bring some of their management team in who are potential succession people that might move along the track, and they've been, I suppose, put in a position to be look a bit like a fool, so that CEO felt more comfortable being with the board and thinking, well, actually, look, they weren't that great, were they? They can't be my successor because look what happened in that meeting.
Yeah.
Knowing full well, having sat on the outside, that actually they were almost set up and put in that position. It's not a great culture, of course.
Yeah, I think most canny chairs who've been around a while would see that coming and not allow that to happen.
Yeah.
And you've got to be a pretty insecure CEO to do that. And I would say to a CEO who is sort of maybe limbering up to do that, actually you'll show weakness if you do. You'll show strength if you let them speak, if you don't finish their sentences, if you do those kind of things. I had a lot of experience of that in the private equity world where I was for quite a long time.
What sort of experience did you have then? Was this as chair, or were we talking more as an executive?
I was at 3i for 26 years, so all sorts of types of investment, venture, growth, buyout, rescue, all that kind of stuff. Majority situations, minority situations. And you learn a lot about sort of board life and the many different types of CEO there are. I mean, we make serious money from often people who were, maybe a little dysfunctional, maybe not, maybe too rampantly entrepreneurial, but finding a way to bring out the best of those characteristics, but surround them, support them with people who would moderate some of the darker side, and just being clear with people, look, we're not going to put up with that. You can't do that. Occasionally you have to do that. I think if you say it with a smile, it's usually better.
It's a very unique situation, I think, particularly with executives that sit in board meetings, to have their bosses in there scrutinising them, and even the peripheral, let's say, bosses, if we talk about non-exec directors, we talk about CEO reporting into chair, those other people that will also carry some weight in the decision of what's going right, performance management, that sort of stuff. Yeah. And most of their interactions are face-to-face and in real time and doing their work, as opposed to most line management responsibility. You delegate something and you leave them to get on with it, and you see the result, it moves up the chain. Yeah. But the board has to see the thought process that goes behind whatever that is. It could be quite exposing, I guess.
It can be. I mean, if you've got a very big decision to take as well, I think I've never really liked, because I don't think it's a very effective way to make a decision, the idea that you have a big decision, you kind of tell the management you want a paper, they kind of guess what you want in the paper, then they send it to you a week before, and it's usually too long because they're guessing what you might like. And then on a wet Monday morning or whatever it is, you kind of in an hour or less, you decide. I think that's a kind of vulnerable way to make a big decision. So I prefer a more iterative process where you break the thing down and you have a conversation about, well, really what is the decision we're taking and when should we take it and how should we take it and who should we involve and what information do we want to see in a board paper? And then you have a kind of second conversation, which is what's our preferred route, which is, the management are giving you a sort of set of options and a recommendation, the cheap and nasty one, the ridiculously expensive one, or the one they want. And then you kind of, you decide what's your preferred route. And then a third conversation where you're finally confirming that decision, but you're spending most of that meeting thinking about the implementation. Because crudely, half the decisions you take which go wrong are because you did the wrong thing, and half of them are because you chose to do the right thing, but you got the implementation wrong. So I think that process and making sure you've got the time doesn't have to be over a long, elapsed time. But I think breaking it down into three helps, and you see and you watch how the management kind of, prepare the information, deal with the challenges through those three sort of sets of experience. I think you learn a lot more than if they just do your paper.
Yeah.
I think a lot of time is wasted by management teams and boards producing papers when people are guessing what should be in the paper. I think that of those things I said, one of the things that's really good is, what information do we think we need to make this decision before we make it, not when you're trying to make it.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be difficult to find the time, and maybe this says something to the decision-making process before that point. But if things are business critical and they are real time, make a decision now. How does that get managed? Because that's a different scenario altogether.
I think, I break it down in I use three a lot. I think it's a human thing, but I think if you break it down into, okay, so we have this decision to take. What do we need to do before we take the decision? What do we need to do during the decision so we get a constructive challenge and all the rest of it? And then, as importantly, what are we going to do after we've made the decision? How are we going to follow it through? And I think if you think about how can we make the best decision, you kind of balance those three things right. So at Royal Voluntary Service, to bring it to life, we've just launched this new national volunteering platform, GoVote. It's only 3 weeks old, but it's already looking like a big hit. And we did all that. This was a massive investment for us, and high profile. Stakes are high. If we cock it up, then we've wasted a lot of money. And we did that. We said, we need to decide whether we're going to do this, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. And we just broke things down into a very simple kind of set of process. So, and we've launched it slightly ahead of time within budget, and it works. But we probably spent more time at the front end than many people would do. But actually we got the benefit of that through, the process and the buy-in and all the rest of it at the back end. So, yeah.
When you talk about buy-in, is that buy-in from who?
I think when you're thinking about buy-in, if you're a chair, you have to think about, you have to think about the board, you have to think about the executive team, you have to think about the organisation more broadly, and you have to think about your main stakeholders. So, if I think of in private equity land, that's pretty straightforward. And for most organisations, you've probably got half a dozen main stakeholder groups. There might be more, there might be a few less. And if as a board you understand what those stakeholders want and need from you, and you know what you want and need from them, and you've got a way of measuring that, so they're getting what they want, you're getting what you want, then usually you can get the buy-in that you want. And I found at 3i, one of my responsibilities for many years was I was on the operating committee. I was responsible for investor relations. So, we had 25,000 shareholders. They're not a homogenous group. There's all sorts of types of different shareholders, and you have to have an understanding of what their motivations are. especially when you don't necessarily like their motivations.
Yeah.
You have to have an idea of that, and you have to have a way of, explaining what you're doing that fits with, their world. Sometimes, they might not agree with what you want to do, and that's fine. At the end of the day, you as a board have to make a judgment in terms of balancing those different requirements that other people have. But I think if you're clear and you understand what they want and what you want from them, it's much easier to do that.
And what sorts of things, thinking about, as you say, the people that maybe don't agree is probably one of the more challenging, let's say, approaches to take. Do you think that there's a particular way that you can engage with them, or questions you might ask yourself, or how you might approach that, particularly if it's something that really does annoy you and just think, why on earth is this particular group of stakeholders, whoever they are, thinking the way they think, totally don't agree with it, cannot understand it, but obviously you need to start to unpack that a little bit so you can at least bring them along the journey.
Yeah, I think, I grew up in a very conflict-rich environment in Liverpool. I was born in Toxteth and delivered fruit and veg around Toxteth when I was when I probably shouldn't have been, but and learnt a lot about conflict management and risk management. And I think, later on I realised, after reading and being better educated, that fundamentally you can do 5 things in a conflict. And Thomas and Kilman, the sort of world experts on this, nailed it. They said, you can compete, you can collaborate, you can compromise, you can avoid, or you can accommodate. And the thing to be clear about is, which one of those do you think might work with that person or that group of people?
Yep.
On that day, on that issue, with that atmosphere in the room, with all the contextual stuff. And sometimes avoiding has a bad connotation. It feels like, we're wimping out. Whereas actually in that moment, in a board meeting, for example, it might be better to kind of save the conversation for afterwards. Or actually, even better, you might have anticipated. So I spend a lot of my time. My grandmother had this great expression when I was a kid. She was Irish. She had no education. And she said to me as a little boy, it's really important to listen to what people say, but it's even more important to listen to what they think. Mm. And so before every board meeting, I'll often go around the room in my head thinking, well, what would Joe, or what will Mary, or what would Erika think of this today? Yep. And I might know that, Erika has strong feelings about this. And I might chat with you beforehand and we might sort of agree, how you might make your point in a way that doesn't derail the meeting, Erika. Yes. Or how actually, if you're an introvert, and I find it fantastic to have introverts on boards. I think we've got a bias to extroverts in our society. Yeah. I think sometimes before a board meeting, you can do quite a lot to help an introvert sort of feel comfortable saying something that they feel uncomfortable saying beforehand. So a lot of it is in the prep. And I did a LinkedIn article a while ago called Getting in the Zone, because I was fussed that, if you take elite performers in other fields, music, athletics, they've got all their training, they've got all their knowledge, they're all match fit, but still, before that match or race or concert, they have this little routine to try and lift their performance in that particular concert, game, whatever. And I don't think we do that as much as board members. And I've tried to do that for a long time, to think, well, what if this is my last board meeting? Why don't we make this the best board meeting we've ever had? And I'm a massive fan of Bruce Springsteen, and that's his approach. He's done 3,500 concerts, but every one he wants to be the next one is the best. And I think there's something about that can really help you and help you put the work in. Yeah. Because there's no substitute for the work. I mean, you've got to prepare properly and also then get yourself in the zone. Yeah.
And how do you get in that zone? I know you spoke a little bit about going around and kind of thinking about what various people might say or react to various different agenda items, or even to each other potentially. How do you do that?
So I generally start with what should be the objectives for the meeting. So if I'm chair, what do we want to get out of today? Well, of course, we want to make the right decisions, but we want to make them in the right way. And if, so for example, on Royal Volunteer Service, when I first became chair, I didn't know the board. We had some new board members. We were coming, but not quite out of a turnaround. And so there are priorities. We need to make these decisions. But also I'm thinking, how can I build, when you take over as chair, how can I build the right level of constructive challenge? How can I make sure, the execs who aren't the CEO feel very comfortable speaking in a meeting? How can I bring out that into it? And this is not like a one meeting trick. You have to think that. So over the course of, several months, I have a sort of set of objectives I set for myself for each board meeting, which is, we really need to make the right decisions on these three things. So you can imagine when we were making the decision on shouldn't we do this platform, that's pretty key.
Yeah.
But then actually, I want to make sure we really make the most of this new non-exec. Now, sometimes it's tempting. People sort of get into that, well, I'm, first meeting, I'll just watch. I've never bought that. I've always thought, if you've got something to add it. And so I will make sure before the board meeting, I expect that, say, really want to contribute. There's this item I think you'll be particularly useful on. Be great if you could be the first person who could speak on that. And then they're feeling in that first board meeting and making a difference. Yep. And the executive are noticing, oh, wow, that person's got something really genuine to add. They don't go away thinking, oh, I didn't really get to know them because they didn't say anything. You have to get the balance right.
That is interesting.
But I think having the objectives for the meeting, so, in workout portfolio land, my main two categories objective would be I want to know a lot of stuff because I've usually come to it, I'm just fresh in the situation and I have to assume I'm ignorant. And then I also want to build some rapport and some credibility, because if I've only got a minority stake and I need to influence, I can't tell them what to do, then, I need to build some kind of rapport credibility with them, because otherwise, why would they listen to me then if they don't have to? So I'd have, be thinking about how do I do that through the meeting?
I think potentially it's some of your experiences as you've kind of moved along, having done executive roles and then moving to do various other roles, that gives you that train of thought. Because I don't think I have ever heard a chair say that they have helped direct the individual pre-first meeting in a particular direction as to which sort of agenda items might be helpful. But I can absolutely see the value in that, because those, let's say a new non-exec director doesn't know what the other skills necessary are on the board, other than the biographies and everything that's just in front of them.
Always
Business
reveal
superficial.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's really interesting that you've brought that in, because that does allow people to talk. And I've spoken to someone else on my podcast, and interestingly, they said the complete polar opposite to you. They said, sit in the board meeting and say nothing, and that's absolutely fine. That's all that's expected of you, which is not necessarily my own personal view, that's for sure, because you have statutory duties and you are equally accountable as everyone else is on the board. The day that you step into that boardroom, it doesn't matter the level of experience you have.
Yeah,
exactly. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I do, which I think is quite helpful, is for a new non-exec, we usually have a chat deliberately. We'll say we'll chat, and I will ask them what they thought of the board papers, because often a new board member has different take on things. So that's really helpful. And then I'll fix up a chat for the week after.
Yep.
A few days after the board, and I'll say, what did you think of the board meeting? And I genuinely want to know what they thought. I genuinely want to know if there's things I was doing as chair that got in the way, or things that were helpful that I could do more of, and their take on how the conversation went. There's real value in that. So I think the person who says, just sit there and be quiet, that might work for them. I mean, I think with a lot of these things, it's what works for that group of people. That really, really wouldn't work for me. I'd feel I didn't add any value.
Yeah.
And I'd feel there was a lost opportunity within that. Because I'm also interested in how people react to points you make. Because it's very telling sometimes when, if you get an overly defensive CEO or CFO, where they're not open to different ideas, different thoughts, they kind of want you to rubber stamp the decisions.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I would say to CEOs I would coach that's a sign of weakness. That's not a sign of strength.
Sounds like a lot of this comes down to emotional intelligence, of kind of being able to read the room, being able to empathise with other people, to have some humanity and some humility about things, and kind of step up, I suppose, and be who you are in that meeting, but also think about everybody else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, early on, possibly because of my background, possibly because of imposter syndrome, I would often feel at odds with the consensus, and almost worse than that, not able to have the right articulation to change people's minds. I didn't have the same language skills, and I found that quite uncomfortable. But I learned to watch and learn, and I'd learned that as a kid where I was. You really got to watch and learn, and so I would just watch really good chairs. And one of the things I discovered, I'm a statistician as well, a master statistician, I think I mentioned, and I realised actually I did a statistical count of something, which was, what's the first word that someone uses when they're going to constructively challenge? I thought that might be quite an interesting thing to know. And it was uncanny that the really good chairs and really good non-execs that I watched always seemed to start their sentences with the word I. So it was, I wonder if you could just go through that again for me, please. I'm not sure I understood that. I wonder what our competition would think of that, or how will they react? It was always like, and we're often taught not to say I. So it may feel counterintuitive to some people, despite their egos. But and I started to experiment, and I suddenly found it was much easier to constructively challenge when I did that, and almost it just liberates sort of other people, because it's not a challenge, because you're taking, I'm not sure I understand. I wonder if I feel, or occasionally I might say, I'm not sure why, but I'm not sure I feel that comfortable with that, and leave a pause. It's always fascinating to see what happens when you do that.
Silence is really interesting, because people do tend to fill that silence. I've read a couple of books on exactly that, of just the pause. And even if you have to count in your head because the pause seems difficult, you do tend to find certain personality types will jump in and hate that silence and feel like they just have to keep talking. And then sometimes you get more information out of them than they otherwise would have given. You
get a lot. And eye contact can be the same thing. So I learned from a policeman. I was helping for a long time I was chair of a charity that helped young people manage conflict more effectively. And a copper told me one night, he was in Reading, and that if you just stop a young person in the street and you just look at them, there's an 80% chance they'll speak.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
And I found anxious finance directors are just the same.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me. And they often give the game away. As you say, that anxiety piece, they will explain what it is that makes them anxious. Sometimes that's something you need to know. Sometimes it's just helpful because you can then support them. Sometimes it's information that they otherwise wouldn't have disclosed. Yeah.
And you've got to be careful with that, because you don't want to be intimidating or, give nothing.
Absolutely.
I think in the best relationships are, there's a good balance of that, and there's a trust that emerges. But occasionally it's quite a helpful tool.
Absolutely. You are right. It shouldn't be used as a way of unbuttoning somebody or forcing them to do something that they otherwise shouldn't do, to manipulate them.
Yeah,
That's,
you don't want to be
that's
doing
not the
that.
right approach. But on the flip side, if you feel that there's something that might actually be hidden, it's a good, you say, it's a good technique.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be able to implement. So directors, lots and lots of them, they talk about risk appetite. It seems to be a bit of a buzzword for many, but very few define what that really means. How do you help people to articulate that risk appetite so they can make real decisions based on whatever risk appetite they may have?
So I think, like a lot of things, there's averages are very terribly dangerous things. They conceal a lot of truth, averages. So I don't like to think of a risk appetite. I like to think of risk appetites. So I think, if you're going to take big business risk, then you need to have low financial risk. If you're going to take big financial risk, then you need, low business risk and so on. So I like to categorize risk and then talk as a board, what do we feel? So, for example, again, at Royal Volunteer Service, we've done this. We've come out quite strongly from a turnaround period. We need to rebuild our reserves. So we're talking about, in terms of our risk appetite, so for every £1 of surplus that we might make above and beyond what we plan to, what are we going to do with it? So we're going to invest half, bank half, build back our reserves, or should we bank 70% so we build back our reserves more quickly? That's a proper risk appetite conversation, I think. As opposed to, is our risk appetite a 7 or a 6?
Yes.
I think that's sort of futile. That doesn't really get there for me. The other thing I think is quite important is that we don't confuse risk appetite with risk tolerance. So risk appetite is about the risk that we are prepared to take on. Risk tolerance is our ability to withstand that risk if that materializes. And I think when people are thinking about risk tolerance, they often think about events. And that, again, can lead to the wrong conclusion, because what you really want to think about are consequences. So a number of different events could cause the same consequence. And often, I think if you look at, generally when things are challenging in a business, it's usually not one thing. It's usually, a number of things combining, like the airline accident. It's very seldom one single cause of failure. It's usually combinatorial risk rather than singular risk. And so I think getting people to understand consequences, and COVID, I think, taught us a lot. It was a horrible, terrible thing, but it did lead us to think about some things perhaps in a healthier way than perhaps we might have done before. I think it's time for a lot of us to change the way to think about risk in a number of ways. And I think the Combined Audit and Risk Committee is one of those things to think about, because of the nature of the risks that we're encountering in this sort of current phase of the world.
Yes.
Most of the big risks that most boards spend their time worrying about are the non-financial risks. The financial risks, obviously most things end up in a financial risk situation, but they're the other things, cyber being the most notable at the moment. And so, the composition of an audit risk committee is generally financially oriented people. And that might not be the best combination. Also, talking about reviewing the audit and financial control systems things might not be the easiest mindset to transition into, a broader risk conversation. So some regulators, like the risk committee to be separated out. I'm thinking, in a number of places where I've been helping people that actually in that circumstance, it would be better if they had a distinct risk committee with a different composition and more time on risk, in terms of that balance of time spent on audit and time spent on risk.
Yeah, and what do you think composition-wise when you talk about if you were to break away the risk committee from the audit committee, as you say, not for regulatory purposes, just because you feel there's enough of a topic there and enough of discussion that you would like to do that as an organisation. What types of people, what types of experience or skills would you expect of people that would be on a risk committee?
You'd want quite a diverse group of people in terms of experiences, mindsets, characters, all of that. It's interesting, when I became chair of the operational risk committee at 3i, the committee was composed of, some of the best, smartest investors we had, but they were all of a certain generation. And I thought, actually, what we really need is a couple of people who are a bit wilder and, we're thinking about things quite differently.
Yeah.
And so we changed the composition, and it was really valuable to do that. I think it's probably a separate topic, but I think a multi-generational risk committee is really valuable. And if you have got a NextGen board, maybe... I think if you have got an NextGen board, it's good to have a member of that NextGen board on every subcommittee anyway. But I think on a risk committee, I'd probably have a couple who, they're thinking differently, and they're aware of different stuff. They talk about different stuff, and they feel differently about things. And that's probably quite a helpful thing to have on the risk committee, because they may be seeing risks that, you can't see.
Yeah. And can you just talk a little bit more about that NextGen board kind of concept?
Yeah, so I've been a fan of this for ages. And so they're generally advisory boards, so they're not involved in governance, although some people put the chair of that NextGen board on the main board. So when I was chairing the EY Foundation, that's the model we had then. NextGen boards can be either a younger group or there can be a multi-generational group. The word NextGen can mean like the next generation of people, or it could mean about a group of people who were advising on us on the next generation of the organisation. And so it's used in two different ways. They generally have a sort of 2-year life, so you rotate them. Mm-hmm. And when people set up their first NextGen board, they generally talent spot for the first one. And then the second one, they have an open application. And that's how they get the model sort of refined. They can be either interacting principally with the executive or with the board or with both. It's generally a good idea to give them some kind of legacy project for their 2-year spell. So where I've been involved in setting them up, we generally give that first NextGen cohort the legacy of coming up with what they think is the right model for the NextGen board going forward. The EY Foundation is now on its 5th cohort, and the model has been refined as we've gone by, but a lot of the work that first cohort did got it nailed pretty much, and we've developed it from there. Because 2 years is such a short time, you really need to focus as well. The 3 things that people tend to want to get out of a NextGen board are their insights, because they've got different insights. Yep. They want their challenge, because they might challenge in a different way, or they might find things challenging that other people don't. And there's also an element of legitimacy, I think. One thing that's really interesting is if you look at churn rates by generation, as opposed to by function or any other thing, I think a lot of people are finding churn in those younger generations is higher than it is in the older generations. And a way of reducing churn is younger people in an organisation feeling they've got some voice, some say in it. But of course, if you have an NextGen board and you say, we really want your views, and then you don't listen to them, you actually make it worse rather than better. Yes. So you've got to go into this with, an open, clear mind about what you're doing. You have to train and you have to provide the support. So with NextGen boards, I'm involved in, each member of the NextGen board has a board buddy. Okay. So usually, if I'm the chair, I'll be the chair of the NextGen's buddy. We put one, as I said before, on each committee. I think that's really valuable. And you get all sorts of surprising things happen, good and bad. I wouldn't also restrict your NextGen board to fast track people. That's the common, understandable thing to do. But actually, it's less diverse if you do that. I think you can benefit from having, a broader range of abilities, because it's the thoughts you want, not necessarily, other things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's definitely something that organisations can consider.
Yeah.
I've seen them in a few organisations, but not so many.
Oh, well, we found when we did the 5 Generations at Work book, found over 200.
Wow, that's quite a lot. What sort of size businesses?
You've got everything from, you've got Gucci, Siemens, FT, Accor, Stora Enso, lots of very large businesses. And then you've got lots of tech businesses have them. It's becoming more common in the social sector as well. And I think, if you again, like most things, you do that before, during, after thing, and you think, well, what do we need to think about before we set one up? And the training, most people quite quickly get to, we need to train them. What they don't get to as quickly is we also need to train the executive who will be interacting with them, because you might say to your NextGen board, we really want you to challenge us. As a board, we want your insights, we want all that. And then, if you're the executive, you're the ones receiving that challenge, basically. They go,
Yes.
who are these people? I've been here 20 years and I didn't get to be on a board that quick. And, so you have to manage. So I found where I've helped people establish them, training the executive is as important, and the board is as important as training the NextGen board.
And if these people kind of potentially get a bit of a feel for what it's like to be on a board, surely that can be a good thing.
It's a fantastic thing, because I think we're developing with these a pipeline. We're developing board experience, and we're breaking down generational barriers in that. I remember for the EY Foundation, there was a fantastic young woman who was on the NextGen board, and she was the one that we put on our nominations committee. And her bullshit radar was the best of all of us. Her way of questioning was stunning. And so very quickly, everyone wanted her on every interview panel that you could think of. She's now a litigation lawyer, quite successful at this early stage. But it was great to see that. And it changed a few perceptions, I think, around what young people can do.
I wonder if it's slightly more sector specific, insofar as sectors that have the kind of next generation buying their products, or that they are very focused on that. I wonder if you looked at other organisations.
We did. So, lots of the organisations in the book are, got really big demographic sort of balance. I think your point around the customers and suppliers is really key, because if you really want to understand your customers, you'll do your market research, you'll do all of those things, but there's nothing like having someone inside saying, actually, that's not how it is really. That's not why we buy that. Because often, market research, the sophistication of it's grown significantly, but sometimes you miss things. And actually, I realised when I was on the board of the University of Warwick, we had 2 student representatives on the board, and occasionally they would, we'd all be in this mindset of thinking, that's the way it is. Yeah, we do that, and the students will love it. And then they'd go, not really. Probably the most graphic example of that was when we were deciding to outsource some of the cafes and restaurants on the campus, and we decided, we'd go with a certain supplier, and we decided on the size of it, or that the team did, and we sort of were endorsing the decision. And one of the students said, "No, that's just nonsense. That's going to be nowhere big enough." And all of the research said, this is the size. And the student stood his ground and said, it was about, you just don't understand how we date these days. I go, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't, like in your day, you probably, asked someone to go for a drink that evening. We don't do with that. We go and have a hot chocolate straight away. And I think we were all sitting there thinking, hot chocolate. How exciting is that? So we actually built them twice as big, and we ended up building twice as big as we were originally going to, and they weren't big enough.
Wow.
So that is a very small example, but we totally we didn't understand that. So, trivial example, but interesting one.
And looking at people kind of moving up, CEOs, if they then decide to move on and do non-exec director career, or they want a portfolio non-exec director career alongside what they're already doing as an executive, what do you think is maybe a couple of things that they need to really consider, not necessarily about the organisation itself, but how they behave and how they are on the board, how different that is being the other side of the
it's very different.
table?
I mean, 3i often used to encourage CEOs who, were not really letting their executive team have full, delegated sort of thing. And one of the ways I would do that is help them get a non-exec job somewhere else. One, so they couldn't be as, in the executive's face every day all the time. Two, they would learn and they would watch another CEO do their thing in their way, and they'd watch the non-execs do that. And also, I think if you're a CEO and you haven't had non-exec experience before you sort of stop and go down the plural route, I think you need a decompression space, zone, time, whatever. Go away for a month or something, but just clear your head, because the whole nature of the exec role, there's so much pressure on you. You're constantly prioritizing. It's why when I talked about conflict management before, CEOs tend to be high and compete and avoid, because they're constantly deciding, well, I'll do that, I won't do that, and their time is tight. If you're a non-exec, you need to be more reflective. You need to, think things through more beforehand and all the rest of it. And that's a kind of way of being, as much as the skills and experiences that you have. And you need to kind of develop that, I think. So that's one thing. The second thing, I think, is really encourage feedback, and really be free, experiment. I don't think, in general, board people, I include myself in this, experiment enough.
Okay.
We don't take the risk of trying out a new approach, a new way of doing something. That kind of thing. I think we should experiment a bit more. Wow.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you very much. And thank you also for your time today. It's been fantastic to catch up.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
It was really interesting to have an opportunity to speak to Patrick today. I learned quite a lot from him about what it's like to be a chair, and what it's like to have those new non-exec directors coming in, and what sorts of things the chair can do to support what that non-exec director will then feel in that meeting and how they'll be able to contribute. I think he was very clear that people that join the board should be contributing, hopefully from day one, even if it may not be as much as other directors. And I think that's a really good starting point for anybody joining a new board. We spoke a little bit about CEOs and how they can step up to be non-exec directors, and he suggested a break was sensible in order to be able to get in the different headspace that's required to be able to take on a non-exec director role as opposed to an executive role. Finally, it's about scrutinising decision making and what that board does. So when decisions are made, I think it's important to scrutinise why certain decisions were made, not necessarily to point the finger, but to bring forward some learnings and to be able to implement those for the future. But it also helps the board to kind of move forward. I know that Patrick spoke about at the end of each meeting having almost a bit of a debrief before everybody leaves to say what works and what didn't work with regards to that meeting, but that can be done as well with regards to projects. I think that could really support businesses improving on an incremental basis moving forwards. That's it for this episode of Grit in the Boardroom. Thanks to Patrick for sharing his story with honesty and insight, and thank you for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please follow the show and share it with someone who leads through complexity. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay brave, and stay in the room.